Contact conversation and predictions of Sfath from Wednesday, 1st of September.
1948 excerpt from the 670th official contact conversation from the 11th of January.
2017 translation by Vivian Legg, with assistance from Marianne Uhlinger-Mondria and Dyson Devine, and amended by Flau the 14th of June 2017.
Today I will name predictions for you which partly also go hand in hand with prophecies, whereby this will not be the last concerning either. You will receive further predictions and prophecies at a later point in time from persons who will maintain the contacts with you after my time. However, today I have much to explain and make you know concerning what will come about as predictions up to the end of the year 1963, which I have recorded in my notes as a result of my own foresights. Further predictions extending beyond the year 1963 and up to the year 2250, which I have fathomed by means of foresights into the distant future, I have recorded in comprehensive annals, which primarily, however, are only intended for your knowledge, and which at a later time you can request of those who will come after me. Among them are also predictions which you are permitted to openly name, but you yourself must always take the responsibility to decide about that. After the predictions, which I am going to give you today up to the year 1963, I will still mention to you a greater number of predictions, which will have to be explained up to the second decade of the new millennium, as well as also partly beyond that into the distant future. A few particular predictions I will also specify in more concrete terms because these will be of particular importance in the coming times, while I will, however, keep everything else in a normal narrative frame and will not openly explain it in detail. Naturally, after my explanations, I will explain various things of all predictions to you more closely, but since I know that you will ask for and publish the records from my annals at a later time, I will hold back with my clarifications concerning explanations. However, if after that you have particular questions regarding the individual predictions, then I will naturally go into those and explain everything necessary in detail to you.
Sometimes it is hard for me to process all the ungood predictions such that it goes fast enough so that I am not burdened by them. Some abominable things, honestly said, sometimes cause me difficulties, especially the horrible happenings which you let me see through the time jumps, be it the different war felonies during the World War, or the Volcanic felonies in the year 1933 and so forth. Sometimes it is really difficult, also if I have bad dreams on account of it.
I know that, but for the sake of your mission, it is necessary that you have knowledge of the various terrible happenings which occurred in the past and also of the present and future happenings, and which you can also sometimes observe directly. Only thereby will you find your way in your life with everything and also fulfill your mission without coming to harm yourself. Also, in regard to the predictions and prophecies, it is very significant that you can process them such that they do not burden you in your consciousness and in your thoughts and feelings, for which the reason is that, in the exercising of your mission, very much that is evil, negative, bad, and terrible will come to you, which you must process so that you are not burdened with everything and can do your work. It is a difficult task to learn this, which, however, will also strengthen you very much and make you invulnerable against all adversities of all kinds, such as hostilities through antagonists, liars, know-it-alls, and slanderers, to whom you will be exposed for your whole life in consequence of your mission. And this will also be the case in your family from the point in time when, in 18 years, you marry in Greece, and within 7 years beget a daughter and 2 sons, because your marriage bond will be very malicious, although you must enter into it for the sake of the fulfillment of your mission, because this will be a further multiplicator for your strengthening and will be necessary so that you can fulfill your mission. However, it will be a very difficult position for you because this bond will burden you very seriously in consequence of strife and betrayal before the relationship will end towards the end of the century due to a divorce. But this will not mean the end of the evil, because after the dissolving of the marriage bond, the lies and slander against you from your former life companion will continue, with which also your daughter and the youngest son will associate. However, the older son will not act against you, but will move away from the family and go his own way, but after some years will seek your help and find his way back to you, and from then on, also helpfully and cooperatively find his way to your mission. And this will happen in this way in the last decade of this century and in the first decade of the new millennia.
What you say does not exactly look like a pleasant life.
Nonetheless, you will make your life pleasant and full of joy because you will untiringly dedicate yourself to your mission with joy, elan, good power of action, and great energy, and make it your passion. This penchant will give you all necessary power, joy, your own peace, and the harmony, so that you will be absolutely always satisfied in every situation, be it in happiness or in sorrow. Additionally, also contributing will be all that which you have to process due to the predictions of every kind about which you have been given an understanding, and therefrom learn and comprehend more than it otherwise would be possible for a human being. In return for that, you will not be envied, because right through your life, and because of all teaching, you will be so burdened that you can only bear it and accept it when you are able to surpass yourself, which will often demand your very last powers.
Again and again you tell me such pleasant and edifying things that I therethrough sometimes almost feel like a trampled dog. But my rationality always tells me clearly that it must be, and that I could not realize what my task is, and could not carry it out without all that which I have to learn. Besides, however, I can always recover myself again, and enjoy myself when you take me somewhere where wonderful landscapes, rare flowers and other plants, birds and animals are in the jungle, and so forth. Also the volcanoes in various countries that you have let me watch, as well as the volcanic, black smokestack in the deep ocean and the real volcanoes, the diversity of the smallest and greatest aquatic creatures, as well as the many other things that you again and again let me see, as well as all the important things and things worth knowing which you keep teaching me, compensates me fully, wherethrough my often gloomy thoughts of being trampled on quickly disappear again, which on your part is probably what it is all about, I think.
Whereby you are right, because I know how you react to everything, and that you have done so already since your birth, since which I have studied your V-sin and all your impulsations, and therefore know what is good for you. But also later, when I'm no more, you will not have to miss these excursions, because also after me, you will be offered the opportunity for that. And I act in this studied wise, as you also have taken this kind on from me, and, on your own accord, act in the same wise when you find it necessary in order to maintain yourself and your mood in good form. Therefore, you then sit down and write valuable books, essays or articles, as well as proverbs and poems, or you have deeply senseful conversations with some or other human beings. But now I will come to the predictions which I have to name for you. In the coming decades, many upheavals in politics and space technology will bring great changes in the entirety of world happenings, about which, however, only some of the most important facts should be mentioned, because hundreds of other coming occurrences and happenings would exceed the frame of the predictions, because to name all today would be too many. Therefore, I will firstly only mention the sequence according to only the very most important coming happenings and occurrences, whereby I will first point out some year by year up to 1963, and then, with the further explanation of various predictions, I will include and explain some things more thoroughly. I will begin with the coming year 1949, when Jerusalem is proclaimed the Israeli capital city, India a member of the Commonwealth, and China the People's Republic of China, after which North and South Korea will be recognized as independent countries. And next year, 1949, also an organization with the name NATO will be founded, which stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which will then exist as North Atlantic Alliance. It will be founded because the signatory countries want to create a military defense union, which is supposed to be a community of shared values of Western countries for the protection from the Soviet Union. Then an official friendship between the Soviet Union and China will be proclaimed. In the year 1952, some things will happen regarding political machinations which will bring about various turnarounds. Also, a so-called European defense community will be founded, and then over the Baltic Sea, in Swedish neutral territory, 2 Swedish airplanes will be shot down by Soviet fighter aircraft, which will lead to several deaths and to political differences, however, not to acts of war. In the same year, the USA will bomb North Korea, which will be oppressed into the new millennium by an evil dictator, and then, under a young, new dictator, will carry out atomic tests and make threats against the USA and all those who will not be in agreement with the North Korean dictator machinations. In Egypt, King Farouk will be deposed by a coup, and in Jordan, King Talal by the military. Then Great Britain will ignite the first atom bomb on an Australian island, which then will be followed by the first hydrogen bomb test in an atoll in the Pacific. For 1953, only one important happening is to mention, whereby there is only the death of Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin to name, after which there will then be another single occurrence in 1954 to mention, a bilateral defense agreement between the USA and Taiwan. In 1955, nothing of significance will happen. However, in the year 1956 in the Soviet Union, a process of de-Stalinization will occur, while an aggressive and provocative attack by the USA with balloons and pamphlets against the politics of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union will occur, against which then naturally Soviet protests and also many media will rise up. Then also the Soviet Union will explode a test atom bomb in Kazakhstan, and then an armed conflict will occur between Egypt on one side and the alliance of Great Britain, France and Israel on the other. Then there will be a beginning guerrilla war against the dictator Fulgencio Batista of Cuba, who will be toppled and replaced by a rebel leader. Then, in 1957, the Soviet Union will test a first intercontinental rocket, as well as send the first satellite, Sputnik, into the Earth orbit, about which the USA will be shocked, for which reason they begin a race in order to be the first to land on the moon, to which end, to them, all means will be right. Then in 1958, there is a founding in regard to a European Economic Community as well as a European Investment Bank, while in Switzerland, a regular television broadcast will be started. After that, Egypt and Syria join together as the United Arab Republic. At the same time, the USA will put its first satellite into the Earth's orbit, and the American Navy will crisscross the North Pole with an atomic submarine, after which a space organization with the name NASA will be formed in the USA, while at the same time the countries Tunisia and Morocco will join with the so-called Arab League. After that, there will be a state of besiegement in Pakistan, after which a military dictatorship will be established. In the year 1959, the Soviet Union will send a satellite to the moon, while the USA will incorporate Alaska into the United States as the 49th federal state, and Hawaii will be granted its independence as a state. A Soviet probe will reach the moon and smash to pieces on it. A further Soviet rocket will be started in order to circle the moon. 3 weeks later, the Pakistani city Rawalpindi, at the foot of the Himalayas, will be proclaimed the new capital city of the Republic of Pakistan, after which a people's uprising occurs in Lhasa against the Chinese occupation of Tibet, which will, however, be crushed, and Tibet annexed by China, and the 14th Dalai Lama will flee in exile to India. For the year 1960, the important thing to mention is that the name of the South American capital city of Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, will be replaced, and this country will get a new capital city named Brasilia. For the peaceful use of nuclear energy, an atomic law will become effective. Then the first atom submarine of the USA will be put into service, which will also be equipped with medium-range missiles. Then a series of grantings of independence follows. So, for the African country, East Cameroon, the Republic of Niger, the Republic of Gabon, also Upper Volta, which in 1984 will be renamed Burkina Faso. Then also for Madagascar, the Republic of the Ivory Coast, the Republic of Chad, the Central African Republic, the Republic of Congo, Mauritania, as well as Senegal, Nigeria, and Togo, as well as British Somalia and Belgian Zaire, and so forth. Also, the British Cyprus will become independent. The south of Somalia will likewise become independent, as will Italian Somalia, whereby Somaliland and Italian Somalia will then unite as Somalia. In Indonesia, the activities of the parties will be strongly limited. In Morocco and in Chile, severe earthquakes will occur, which will cause many thousands of deaths. A U.S. espionage aircraft of the type U-2 will be shot down over Sverdlovsk by Soviet armed forces. This will be announced only later. A secret espionage aircraft of the USA will be shot down over the Soviet Union by Soviet military forces. Then the Turkish military will revolt against the government, after which the country's leader will be executed. In Baghdad, as a coalition, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, will found an organization for economic cooperation, to which the founding countries, Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, as well as Venezuela, will belong. In Europe, a European Air Traffic Control Organization will be founded, as will an Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. In autumn 1961, Soviet and GDR associations of the People's Police and National People's Army, together with company fighting groups, will block off the border to West Germany with barbed wire. However, soon thereafter, a wall of cavity blocks and concrete posts will be constructed. After that, the year 1962 will bring some unpleasant things, beginning with the separation of the city of Berlin into East and West Berlin. Since next year, therefore 1949, the German Democratic Republic, that is, the GDR, will be founded and will divide Germany over around 40 years until 1989 into two countries, which will bring many deaths because the human beings will then want to flee the GDR. Then a Soviet intervention disruption will be carried out against the West Berlin air traffic. In Yemen, the monarchy will be overthrown by the army and a republic declared. Also in this year, diverse countries will gain their independence. While in Cuba, medium-range missiles will be stationed by the Soviet Union, which will lead to dangerous confrontations with the USA. The stationed missiles will be removed again after hard negotiations, whereby then the Cuban crises will end. In India, the Chinese military will make an incursion into the national territory, which will lead to an Indian-Chinese border war. In the year 1963, a political revolution will occur in Paraguay through the military, and the dictator will be removed. West New Guinea will become part of the Asiatic Republic of Indonesia. The Soviet Union will launch a manned space capsule which will remain 5 days in orbit and will circle 80 times around the Earth. In Moscow, between the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and the USA, there will be a contractual agreement made in regard to a ban on atomic weapons tests in the atmosphere, in space, and underwater. The Asiatic country of Singapore, dependent on Great Britain, will become independent. In the USA, the country's president will be murdered by an assassination. In Iraq, a coup of the Iraqi Arabic Socialist Ba'ath Party will lead to the collapse of the government. Within the Indian Union, the region of Nagaland will become a separate federal state. Just these mentioned facts named so far will change the world picture very greatly and will have grave consequences right into the third millennium. Also in nature, the plant world and animal world, and especially in the Arctic and Antarctic, as well as on all continents of the Earth, as well as aus Artungen, due to irresponsible machinations of the ever-increasingly excessive humanity of the Earth, there will be, since the beginning of the World War in the year 1914, as well as in the coming time and far into the third millennium, unusual and destructive changes over the entire planet. From then on, the climate will change due to the tremendously growing overpopulation, together with the wandering of the poles, which began already several hundred years ago on Earth, and through which the animals and creatures will be impaired in the sense of magnetic orientation, especially great sea creatures, which will succumb to death because they lose their orientation and become stranded. Thereby, through the displacements of the poles, it will come to the point that where a cold or moderate climate now prevails, it becomes tropical, while where warmth and heat prevail, not only the cold but the moderate zones will spread out. And this will on one hand come about due to all the felonious doings of the human being who will, through exploitation of the Earth and through atom bomb tests, which will carry on until in the new millennium, change the inner part of the Earth and evoke shifts of the Earth's tectonic plates, whereby, however, on the other hand, also naturally the wandering of the poles contributes to these changes. However, the wandering of the poles is not thereby the really great terrible thing. Rather, concerning this, it is the irresponsible intervention in the nature, in the planet itself, as well as in the world of the plants and natural living organisms. The great entirety will alone be created through extensive destructive machinations of the humanity, thus concerning the entire impairment of all life and regarding the climate-destroying influences out of which unexpected natural catastrophes will result. As a consequence of that, also through the guilt of the Earth's humanity, nature and the water worlds, as well as the worlds of plants and animals, will be impaired in their life-wise and in their ability to exist, however, also will be killed, eliminated, and brought to extinction through many kinds of poisons. Therethrough in the coming times, many living things will die and be eradicated. Through the exploitation of the Earth's resources, the geologic constitution of the Earth will change, and gradually inner Earth movements of the Earth plates will come about, for which reason tremendous earthquakes and volcanic eruptions will emerge in all areas of the Earth, through which hundreds of thousands of human beings will die, and primeval destructions will be evoked, as many wars and terror will claim millions of human lives, and also many valuable antiquities will be irrevocably destroyed. Due to the pole wandering ongoing for a very long time, there is, in the Bermuda Triangle, an area north of the Caribbean which lies between the island of Bermuda, a British overseas territory in the Atlantic, and the coast of Florida, which in the first beginnings begins to enlarge, whereby it will expand in the coming times and far into the third millennium. The same happens with the counterpart, the Dragon's Triangle in the Devil's Ocean, in an area in the Pacific, approximately 100 kilometers south of Tokyo, Japan, off the Miyake Island. The Dragon Triangle and the Bermuda Triangle are known as places where ships and aircraft disappear under mysterious circumstances. The peculiarity of the two triangles is that, on the one hand, both are at the same degree of latitude and are almost at opposite points, but where so-called ghost ships turn up in both regions. In the world's oceans, the monster waves, Three Sisters and White Walls, will increase in the future due to a climate collapse that has already begun and is rapidly advancing, and also due to the pole wandering that has also been ongoing for several centuries, which will also relate to the Kavensman phenomenon. Translator's note: a Kavensman is a class of giant wave that runs across the ocean. White walls are sudden, very steeply rising waves, and the Three Sisters denote three fast successive superwaves. The monster waves, that is to say, the mega waves, which have frequently appeared since oceans have existed, can become more than 30 meters high and even pull large ocean vessels irretrievably into the depths. Due to immense storms and the rising of the sea level as a result of the melting of the poles, many parts of the landscapes of many countries, as well as the coasts of sea-bound states, will be destroyed, both in the whole of Europe up to the east, to the Bering Sea, Africa, Asia, America, Australia, China, India, Japan, Canada, New Zealand, South America, and Tasmania, and so forth. It will also be in the coming time that by means of inner Earth movements, displacements of the ocean floor will take place, and much new land is pushed up in the Atlantic and the Pacific. And where the coastlines of many countries still are today, the seas will massively penetrate the land with their waters and will irrevocably destroy and devour many human achievements, as well as bring death to much life of all kinds. Much of the water from streams, rivers, and lakes will run dry through water robbery, which humankind will practice, driven to irrigate naturally infertile soil for the sake of food production, which, however, in many places will radically contribute to climate change. In addition, however, large areas of fertile agricultural land will be destroyed in all countries of Earth because less and less space remains for the growing overpopulation, which will require, through the wrong use of agricultural land, more and more residential buildings, roads, ways, and factories, and so on, so that they can exist and move around. All sorts of thoroughfares will be extended ever further in the coming time, which will, over and over again, however, quickly be too small again to cope with the immensely growing volume of traffic, and consequently, yet again and again and increasingly, new streets, ways, and railways have to be built. The coming of transport vehicles of all kinds will reach unimaginable proportions, so that already at the beginning of the third millennium, worldwide, billions of vehicles will overload and clog the roads, but this will become much more extensive the more rapidly the overpopulation grows in the future. Just as the entire road and rail transport on the Earth will grow in a terrifying way, this will soon also come about with satellites in close and distant space, which will teem with hundreds of satellites and tens of thousands of missiles and other debris coming into orbit, and in a few decades, also space stations will circle around the Earth. The beginning of this will take place in the approaching 2 decades, when efforts are made to get into the near-terrestrial space, and also to take rockets and vehicles to the Earth's moon. In 1961, for the first time, the Soviet Union will bring a manned space capsule into orbit and then also be able to again achieve a successful landing. In the coming years, unmanned and remote-controlled vehicles will be brought to the moon, both from the USA as well as the Soviet Union. Therewith, a race to the moon will then take place between the USA and the Soviet Union, in which the USA will have success towards the end of 1969, as well as several times afterwards. But initially, a great deception will take place preceding the whole thing with a fake moon landing filmed on the Earth, which will be broadcast worldwide to show a victory and a lead over the Soviet Union. The supposed astronauts will be hypnotically influenced in such a wise that they believe to have actually fulfilled the lunar mission, while many co-workers contributing to the deception will be set under drugs and hypnosis and will forget everything. So ultimately, only 3 people really will have the knowledge of the deception, and they will be silent. In 1971, a so-called World Economic Forum, WEF, will then be set up as a foundation in the Swiss canton of Geneva, and already, after considerable time, will cause a lot of turmoil and anger among the people. In this forum, leading international economists, politicians, intellectuals, and journalists will meet to discuss current global economic, health, and environmental policy issues, and to initiate a comprehensive globalization. This will not be harmless because due to the globalization which will be striven for and achieved worldwide, life forms of all species and kinds will be carried off into other countries in a few years, displacing and eradicating indigenous forms of life. These will be the amphibians, fish, mammals, insects, animals and other creatures, plants, reptiles and birds of various species and kinds, but then, through globalization, also various illnesses and rampantly spreading diseases will be transmitted and start to spread worldwide as epidemics, endemic infection, and pandemics. Note, Billy, epidemics are regional or area-specific. A pandemic is global. Already in the years 1957 and 1958, a flu virus pandemic will demand about 2 million dead worldwide. Another flu virus pandemic will follow in 1968 and continue until 1970, which will demand 1 million deaths worldwide. In 1979, in the Soviet Union, there will be an anthrax epidemic to which a total of around 350 people will fall victim. In 1980, an immunodeficiency pandemic will break out, from which around 39 million people will die worldwide by 2020. In the year 2000, Canada will be affected by a small epidemic caused by contaminated drinking water. 2002 and 2003 will be the years of a pandemic which will claim around 1,000 human lives worldwide. A swine flu will follow in the years 2009 and 2010, from which around 20,000 human beings will die, while in the same year in South America a plague will break out, spreading to large parts of Latin America and other countries up to the year 2015 and beyond, and causing thousands of deaths. In the same year, the plague will spread again and claim about 600 dead, and later, in 2014, the plague will claim further deaths in Madagascar. Haiti will be stricken by cholera from 2010, which then claims many thousands of human lives, after which a small epidemic will cost the lives of around 60 human beings in northern Germany in 2011. In 2013, a small epidemic will kill some people in Europe, whilst in Central America, about 1 million human beings will fall ill from a fever epidemic and several hundred will die of it. Then in 2014 in West Africa, an epidemic will break out which will claim about 14,000 human lives, but can then only be kept at bay temporarily. After that, in 2015, that epidemic, rampantly spreading disease, will occur again in many Latin American countries, as it already will have occurred in 2009 and 2010. However, such kinds of illnesses and rampantly spreading diseases continue to occur in the years. Billy, I have to keep silent about these data because it is not intended to spread anxiety and horror through premature predictions. Radical extremism and civil rebellion in many countries will lead to bloody uprisings, civil wars and religious and sectarian terrorism in the coming times, with especially Libya, Egypt, Turkey, Iraq and Syria being the focus of all rebellious and murderous evil in the new millennium. The earth will break up in some parts, and England, as well as a large part of Japan, will be devoured by the sea, whereby also the northern part of Europe will profoundly change and become uninhabitable. Thus, altogether, a new regulation of the planet will establish itself, and a purification will take place in the high governments and the officers below them, because the people will stand up against them and will demand that they be given greater consideration and that the individual human beings and their concerns are taken seriously. There, through and through other specific circumstances, political, economic and other conditions will appear, which will lead thereto that among the human beings a better equality and a greater understanding for and among each other, as well as for the requirements of the individual human being, are striven for. Going hand in hand with all the upheavals and changes that will come inevitably, which is absolutely certain, will also be an unprecedented revolutionary evolution in all technical, medical and all other scientific fields, which will lead to a very long-lasting, rapid development period, which will bring with it an immeasurably great and rapid progress in all conceivably possible areas. This is in contrast to religious thought, which is driven by the great and far-reaching anxiety of the world's population as a result of many events of war and terrorism, to a new faith in religion and sects, but this will therethrough fall away from all facts of reality and the truth arising from it. Many will indeed turn away from their religions because they become ones who think in line with the truth, but they nevertheless indulge in their wrong faith without a religious affiliation because they have fallen victim to it from childhood and are not able to free themselves from it. In their belief, they will also be dependent on lying politics and thus stir up unpeace worldwide, especially in America and in Europe, where a dictatorship union will emerge and, together with America, will brew up hostilities against the Soviet Union, which will be dissolved and, from the year 1991, will be called Russia. It will then be this newly emerging Russia which will create the basis for a widespread peace, whereby under certain circumstances a Russian armed engagement against the dictatorship union in Europe and against America may break out because these are acting irresponsibly and in a peace-destroying wise with war-inciting machinations against Russia. But Russia will end communism and also search for peaceful values all around, and indeed quite in contrast to America and the dictatorship union in Europe. Nevertheless, however, from 1998 onwards, because of a series of peaceful and rational politicians, things will tend in the direction that many efforts and good activities will take place, which ought to bring about gradual political changes to the good, but which will bring all the opponents of the dictatorship union in Europe and America to the scene who do not want peace but unpeace, in order to thereby be able to satisfy their territorial claims over other countries in a belligerent wise. As a result, the period will come when, as a consequence of the provocation by the dictatorship union in Europe and America against Russia, the danger of a further world-encompassing war will again grow. If the restrained and peace-striving Russia, under some circumstances, lets itself be forced into an armed engagement, which is not yet fathomed in the future and corresponds to a prophecy whereby it cannot be said yet whether a catastrophic activity will or will not occur in this period. Human life, however, will go on one way or another, that is certain, regardless of whether or not a further worldwide war will strike the Earth's humanity, as it will also go on one way or another through the changes in the Earth caused by the wandering of the poles. The whole of that which is still uncertain must not be misinterpreted, for every prophecy can be changed by means of action based on rationality and intellect in such a way that it does not have to fulfill itself, but can change for the better, the good, and the positive. All effects are built up over years, decades and centuries, but the event that results from a prophecy is always determined according to the rational or irrational actions of the human being, thus in good or evil, that is to say, in the positive or negative. However, that which results from pure natural processes and happenings will inevitably be the case because it cannot be influenced by the human being if the sequence of events has already crossed that zenith whereby no further influencing by the humanity is possible. And that will be precisely the case when, by the turn of the coming millennium, the Earth's population does not listen to the prophetic and predictive warnings and continues its destruction conduct. And in this respect, the unstoppable growth of overpopulation must be mentioned first, but following that, everything destructive, which is irresponsibly done in an eliminating and eradicating form due to the overwhelming mass of Earth humankind on planet Earth to nature, the flora and the world of all life forms. These predictions, which have already been spoken about and mentioned several times repeatedly with regard to the coming happenings, because everything is of very great significance, are all to be taken very seriously. Fundamentally, they show that their fulfillment will be unavoidable, whereby they will have validity in the coming times until well into the third millennium, and will bring about great upheavals. Firstly, unprecedented prosperity will arise in every level of the population, which will also lead to greed for wealth. This will mean that for many people the purpose in life will become immense wealth. Consequently, they will crave wealth and will become millionaires and billionaires many times over through all kinds of criminality and gambling. And all this will bring with it that deceivers, other criminals, and all sorts of financial jugglers will deceive many ignorant human beings from various levels of society by dozens and hundreds of millions of Swiss francs, D-marks and dollars, and reduce the deceived to beggary. Bankers will also join in with these cheatings and pocket horrendous remunerations in the millions, as well as harm the banks themselves. All around, to a great extent, lying and deception will arise as never before, as will family tragedies with many deaths, as will be more and more the case in schools and so forth, caused by psychologically disturbed perpetrators, as well as by terrorist assassinations at public events and gatherings of human beings. Through the coming wealth in all levels of society, human beings will become egoistic, selfish, and greedy as never before, whereby criminality and gavolt felonies will also increase to a high degree. All the rules of the good and the right will be maliciously depraved and misused in the coming decades and far into the new millennium, whereby innumerable human beings will abandon all their good intentions, thereby anarchistic machinations which have gotten badly out of the control of the good human nature will arise, from which especially the young and the middle-aged will be affected. Very much of the good, the positive and the righteous, as well as the correct modes of behavior, will be disregarded by the coming generations and will no longer be learned and will be forgotten, as will happen with progress, learning and general knowledge, as well as regarding what real peace, freedom, harmony, love, and deep feelings for fellow human beings, nature and its world of plants, and all forms of life are. Among the human beings of the earth, are more and more extensive cowardice and unconcernedness will arise, which will fall very badly out of the control of the good human nature to such a frightening degree that human beings will be robbed in front of the fellow human beings and tormented, beaten, whipped, tortured, physically and psychically treated with gay volt and even killed without anyone rushing to help but only passively looking on. Many young human beings, children and adolescents, fall into unconcernedness and lack of deep feelings for others and poverty of thought and feeling because their human feeling and thinking, as well as the sum of all the characteristics of consciousness and attributes of personality, are lost in them, even up to the loss of the most precious and valuable things of all, namely intellect and rationality. They will also be lacking in real vitality, in particular all self-perceptible individual phenomena or formations of their own vitality and vivacity. The majority of young human beings will become dependent on luxury in the coming years until well into the new millennium and will only be bad-mannered and despise any authority. They will despise decency and respect, and indeed for themselves, as well as for the elderly, the authorities, the police, and the fellow human beings in general. They will no longer work, but will only want to live unhonestly from what others achieve in a righteous way. The majority of young ones, even children, will contradict their parents and teachers and tyrannize them while they behave noticeably badly in society. And all this bad behavior will go on up to middle age, and consequently also 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds will still behave in these ways. In addition, hallucinogenic drugs will be misused, making the pathological craving for drugs a daily occurrence, and the young people, as well as older ones, will no longer be any use for work and will be prone to schizophrenic illnesses. In addition, these types of juveniles will often criminally become dependent on social security benefit and must be fed, provided with medical attention, and maintained by society. The values of life will be forgotten by many human beings in the times to come or consciously trampled, as also the fall from all morality occurs and even a moral corruption in wide sections of the population to the point of open whoredom, whereby everything quickly develops into a state-approved, open and tax-paying whoredom. And this whoredom will become a business of lust for innumerable human beings of both genders, who also practice it, however, also make use of it, and whereby also children of all ages will be involved because the sexual abuse of children will take the upper hand all over the world. And all this whoredom will grow all over the world because the coming electronic possibilities for information will open up all the gates so that all those whoring around and abusing children will be able to communicate with each other, make arrangements, and meet in order to carry out their disgraceful bad work. and everything will get very badly out of the control of the good human nature, such as it has never before appeared, and will even surpass the legend of Sodom and Gomorrah. From the last, that is to say, the Third World War, which raged from 1939 to 1945, radical extremist groups already emerged in the manner of Nazis, which will spread worldwide in the coming times, beginning in Germany and then spreading across Europe, becoming active also in the USA, Russia, and other countries. Also, murderous terrorist organizations will come about, particularly in the Arabic, Near Eastern and Asiatic countries, whereby the culpability for the coming about of these murder organizations will be supported by America, because it will train the terrorists themselves as fighters and then provide them with all necessary weapons and so forth. Thereby the Secret Service and war machinations of America will bring much disaster over many countries of the earth, namely through war-based murdering and destructions, which will be instigated by the American military and mercenaries in the coming times until well into the third millennium. There will also be other great, dreadful wars, even after the 3 world wars which have occurred up to now, therefore after the end of the 1945 war, being the latest, so first in Asiatic countries where the French Foreign Legion, as well as the Americans, will cause military and monstrous inhumanities in several countries. From 1978 onwards, there will be a state of conflict lasting into the third millennium in Afghanistan, with which the USA will belligerently interfere from 2001 and fight against a terrorist organization, after which, in the second decade, the terrorist leader will be killed by the secret action of a special unit. In 1979, there will be a war between Iraq and Persia on the Persian Gulf, in which the USA will also interfere. In 1990, dictatorial Iraq will attack and annex Kuwait, which again will be a reason for the USA, through the order of the president, to invade Iraq in 1991 and carry out a bloody and destructive war. In the third year after the turn of the millennium, a further major war in Iraq will take place through the USA, where American troops will invade and emerge as a victorious occupying force and will also execute the dictator. This war will also claim many dead and bring about great destruction. Therefore, the USA, and especially 2 of its irresponsible US presidents, father and son, will have to bear the responsibility for both wars. Everything will come about as a result of untenable and irresponsible lies on the part of the 2 presidents, as well as the secret services, which consequently have to bear the culpability. From then on, endless religious belief delusion assassinations and murder will reign in the regions there, as well as in Syria. In the same place, America will be to blame for the emergence of an Islamist-based terrorist organization of unimaginable brutality and abominableness, whose murderous terrorist acts will spread fear and horror worldwide, also in the whole of Europe, emanating from a felon who will call himself a caliph and proclaim a caliphate.
Note Billy. With the title caliphs, a man himself is given the title of a representative or successor of the Prophet Muhammad, while the caliphate is the domain of his rule. The Islamic terror organization has, in truth, nothing to do with the religion of Islam, which, however, is nevertheless used as a false claim by the leader of the Islamistic terror organization.
The murderous actions of this terrorist organization will be carried out by fanatics and by adventure seekers, misguided ones, criminals, reckless ones, and felons who have been gathered from around the world, who for years will carry out a bloody mischief, torturing people massacring, treating women and girls with physical and psychical revolt, kidnapping people, as well as subjecting countless human beings to beheadings and other brutal and bestial deaths. The great terrorist organizations that will emerge in the coming decades, which are caused by USA Secret Service felonies and USA war crimes, but which will also be seemingly religiously conditioned, will originate in Arabic countries and will spread around the world, just as diverse later terrorist organizations will, which also result from the criminal, military, and secret service machinations of the United States of America, and will also claim many lives in several countries of Europe and also in the USA. Terrorist organizations also originate elsewhere, also in Europe, where especially radical right-wing terror groups will be up to their anarchistic as well as foreigner hostile and racially hostile mischief far into the third millennium. Also in times to come, as it has been since time immemorial, the USA will provoke through its criminal, political, and secret service intrigues and government infiltrations and military warlike interventions throughout the world, unpeace, hatred, terror, torture, war, murder, assassinations, elimination, and destruction. Through their guilefulness, the USA itself will not be spared from the emerging terrorism, especially when, in the first year of the third millennium, New York is hit by heavy terrorist attacks and will have thousands of dead to mourn. But after that, such happenings will repeat themselves in the course of the years also in other ways. In many instances, therefore, America will be to blame for the worldwide emerging terrorism which will demand unspeakable suffering and destruction throughout the world. The terrorism arising in the next decades and in the new millennium will have unimagined consequences, which can no longer be solved or can only be partially solved by the most heavy military operations and fightings. Also, apolitical terrorist and felonious organizations which have existed for many decades or emerge new can no longer be dissolved by police and military operations characterized by revolt. Tens of thousands of young and middle-aged, misguided, work-shy, thrill-seeking and criminal human beings will stream towards these terrorist and criminal organizations of various kinds, which will arise and spread worldwide because they inconsiderately and willingly let themselves be indoctrinated in order to carry out criminal, inhumane, and felonious acts, to resort to torture as well as to commit awful murders, exert physical and psychical revolt, and to spread ruin. Many people will go over to terrorist and felonious organizations because the political machinations in their own homeland become more and more hostile to the citizens, where through the population is tormented and undermined in their political right to be heard. The unrightfulness arising through that and the resulting resentment will be the cause of unsatisfaction amongst the citizens, as a result of which action will then be taken against the governments, leading to demonstrations characterized by revolt and to deaths. That will also be in the course of time after which, in Europe, a dictatorship union headquartered in Belgium is going to come about, which the European countries will inconsiderately join as a result of the promised lies of the dictatorship's founder. This dictatorship, it will thus come, will be governed by might-hungry leaders and will sneakily endeavor to bring all European states oppressively under its might. The dictatorship, however, will also strive to extend its might to countries outside of Europe, namely through alliances in order to, as it has been since time immemorial, newly stir up Western hostility towards Russia. And in this respect, The USA will be the first and strongest ally of the dictatorship union and will do everything to newly kindle the Cold War if the Cold War, triggered by the West after the war in 1945, ends in 1991, and to agitate against the new Russia in order to provoke warlike actions. But in the USA and the dictatorship union in Europe, there will be human beings who are peace-minded for Russia, who will seek to prevent the evil, but this will lead to questionable political actions. All this, along with streams of refugees, wars, and terrorism, will lead in the future to unpeace and hatred amongst human beings and between the peoples, as well as to religious hatred, sectarian hatred, hatred of foreigners, and race hatred, which will arise very strongly again in the new millennium. And this will arise especially from the year 2005 onwards, and namely through a confused governing woman in Germany, who will evoke the movement of streams of refugees to Europe from socially poor and war-stricken countries such as Africa, Arabia, and Asia. Among the real refugees, however, will be many work-shy ones, criminals, felons, and terrorists who will carry out much evil mischief in the European countries. This woman who is ill in her consciousness and might-obsessed will also be significantly responsible for many terrible things which will occur through work-shy ones, criminals, felons, those who exert physical and psychical gay-vault and terrorists who have crept into Europe, and this will happen in Germany and in other European countries that belong to a dictatorship union from the 1990s onwards. This might holder will not be in control of her senses, which will, however, not even be recognized by experts. Consequently, she will perform her dreadful mischief unhindered and even be praised for it by her simple-minded followers. And this will also be the case if she deceitfully acts against the new Russia, which will emerge from the Soviet Union around a decade before the turn of the new millennium. In her further might behavior, the might holder will, in total irrationality, call forth unimaginable masses of refugees from Africa, Arabia, and Asia, as a result of which millions of refugees from underdeveloped third world countries and from war zones will migrate and creep into Europe, leading to serious problems as well as to many criminal, felonious, and terrorist actions and deeds. But this will not be recognized by her supporters of low intelligence, nor will the fact that all the politicians who are on her side and support her will not recognize the true political problems, for which reason many among them also will not recognize the entire refugee problem. Fundamentally, they will all be egoistic, imperious, self-obsessed, and incapable, and therefore they will not recognize the truth and the precarious refugee situation, whereby they will simply ignore the fact that thousands of true and false refugees will lose their lives on their routes of escape to Europe. The politicians in positions of responsibility who stand by the German woman who has the might will let her do as she likes and even assist her. Consequently, the woman will not be held accountable for all the many dead refugees she will be responsible for. From the year 2009 until 2017 in the USA, the government will be led by an African-American president who will be well respected by the majority at first, and can also raise many hopes, which then changes, however, because he will not be able to prevail against his advisers and antagonists. Consequently, the majority of his former advocates will be against him. At first, he will be a good governor and will also try to fulfill his plans and election promises, which will nevertheless only succeed a little for him in his entire presidency because he is unable to defend himself against his false advisers and antagonists, thus ultimately becoming a failure and betrayer to himself.
He will come to the presidency as a very good man at first, but gradually he will fall prey to the influence of his opponents and act according to their false and hostile instructions because he will be too inexperienced and too weak for his office and will fail. From the 1980s onwards, there will be a worldwide unemployment which will continue for decades until far into the new millennium and will bring a lot of hardship, misery, and crime. Likewise, also inflation as well as much private, family, state, and corporate indebtedness through which companies, private individuals, families, and countries become illiquid, bankrupt, and banks also become bankrupt. This will be linked to the fact that trade unions will increasingly and more often organize workers' strikes, thereby calling on employers to pay ever higher wages to the workers. The higher wages will result in a higher standard of living, and it will also happen that foodstuffs and the entire cost of living and all goods of every kind become ever more expensive and become unaffordable for poorer human beings. It will also be the time when young people in the civilized, industrialized countries are rapidly and severely falling into demoralization and a poverty of intelligence, have no control over their thoughts and feelings any longer, fall into severe psychological and reactive psychoses, whereby they also suffer from and fall ill with depression and symptoms of schizophrenia, as well as mania, anxiety disorders, and other psychotic problems. This will spread more and more in the new millennium, which is why it will be necessary for you to write a book about that which will be a great help to all those who will then strive to study your book. Worldwide, the value of money will fall very low, which will be the case especially in Europe, through the introduction of a dictatorship union currency. This currency will drive some member countries of the dictatorship union into unimagined, horrendous debt, which is to be compensated for by further financial indebtedness. Thus, national bankruptcy will emerge as a result of national mismanagement, whereas in other countries this can be prevented in many cases only by governmental financial aid. The same will happen in the case of various large banks which, through megalomaniacal and economically inexpert people, will practice financial mismanagement and will continue to exist only through financial federal subsidies. All these happenings cannot remain without consequences because the peoples will rise up and, under certain circumstances, start revolutions. And if then the slimy domestic political machinations of the dictatorship union continue to be transformed into foreign policy machinations and the smear campaign against Russia intensifies, then that could lead eventually to Russia being provoked into an armed conflict against the dictatorship union in Europe and the USA. If this were to prove true according to an old prophecy, then the European dictatorship union would rather be free of its dictatorship than disband as a result of instability and quarrels among the member countries. This could also mean, as the same prophecy states, that Europe would then be pacified by Russia, and the pacification could also spread all over the world. As far as today's predictions are concerned, these will now be the last, whereby the upcoming happenings line up around the world, so therefore in Europe, Australia, Asia, Africa, and the entire American continent. On the American continent, much will be destroyed far and wide in a more distant time, as the great caldera will break open, which cannot be prevented, as the earth being broken open by the great Eiffel caldera in Germany cannot, whereby the upper part of Europe will become a sea of fire. Other countries will also suffer great changes, whereby, for example, a large part of Japan will sink into the sea,
as also northern coasts of Europe will be swept away by wild floods. Off the east coast of America, in the Atlantic and the Pacific, islands will be lifted from the waters, and New York and parts of the coast destroyed, while in the South Seas, great upheavals will take place. But also in the south of Europe, the all-transforming consequences will be enormous when the volcanoes of Mount Etna, Vesuvius and Stromboli, as well as the submarine largest active volcano of Europe, Mount Marsili off the coast of Italy, together with about 24 further submarine volcanoes in the Mediterranean, begin to erupt. Also the caldera, that is to say the supervolcano Phlegrean Fields in Italy, is already making itself more and more noticeable in order to tear open the earth in the distant future. In Italy and Sicily alone, there are 24 dangerous mainland, island, and submarine volcanoes, 3 of which are caldera areas, which will cause much terribleness in the more distant coming times. The fact that by far the most active volcanoes are submarine and are extremely active is not yet known by the Earth humanity in general, because these largely unknown underwater volcanoes, which are upon the Earth in their hundreds of thousands, never break through the surface of the water. A whole ring of such underwater volcanoes lies on the peaks of the longest mountain chain in the world, the Middle Ocean Ridge, which, however, is still today not known to the Earth humanity. Particularly from the year 2001, the southern Italian volcanoes will be particularly active, whereby great activity will be shown by Stromboli in 2002 and Mount Etna in 2003, which are arranged in a zone where the African and the European earth plates collide. In the new millennium, greater activity will also take place in Vesuvius in Italy, as well as great volcanic activity on the southwest coast of South America, and especially on Sumatra and other areas in Indonesia. However, particularly severe seaquakes worldwide will increasingly lead to huge tsunami waves, which are many meters high, which will wreak much havoc and claim the lives of tens of thousands of victims, which will be the case especially in the first 2 decades of the new millennium up to the year 2015, but it will not end there. Everything will continue to an increasing extent, the signs of which will be the great earthquakes in central Italy, which will be the beginning phase of the fulfillment of those happenings, which will bring many catastrophes and much terribleness and much suffering, hardship, misery, and destruction over the earth. This developmental process will be announced especially in the new millennium by 2015 through many earthquakes and seaquakes which will claim hundreds of thousands of human lives, which will not be able to be prevented by Earth's humankind. And that there will be so many dead, which will be very many more in the distant future, will only be made possible as a consequence of the high number of the rapidly growing and excessive overpopulation of Earth's humankind. However, up to the time at which the coming really great natural catastrophes begin, namely from the new millennium and especially from the year 2015 onwards, being the point when Earth humanity will no longer be able to alter anything concerning the coming disastrous happenings and can no longer stop it, thousands of small, medium, and large seaquakes and earthquakes will shake the Earth. The most severe of those from the new millennium up to the actual beginning of that which is unchangeable in the year 2015 shall be mentioned, and everything shall thereby give a glimpse into the horror which will arise through the natural catastrophes. And all these natural disasters are 75% the fault of Earth's humankind itself as a result of its irrationality and all its destroying machinations on the planet, nature, the entire plant world and water world, as well as all their living creatures. In the first year of the new millennium, already on the 1st of January 2001, the area of Mindanaos in the Philippines will be shaken by very strong seaquakes, after which, only about a week later, the island group Vanuatu in the South Pacific will follow, however, which will happen in both cases without any casualties. A week later, however, El Salvador will be affected with about 1,000 victims to be lamented, after which a very severe earthquake will then claim around 22,000 human lives in India. And in the new millennium, without exception, dozens of earthquakes will take place worldwide every year, which will be spoken about, but will not claim any fatalities or will claim only a few. On the other hand, however, there will be many human lives to be lamented with other severe sea quakes and earthquakes, as in 2006 in Iran with about 100 dead, then likewise in 2006 in Indonesia in Java, whereby 6,500 deaths shall be counted, while in 2007 in the Solomon Islands, about 110 human beings will die by way of seaquakes. Another severe seaquake will also take place in 2007 at Chincha Alta, which belongs to Peru, with the deaths of about 620 human beings, followed by Sumatra with 36 deaths, and then the Republic of Congo with 67 deaths. Then, in 2008 in China, another very severe earthquake will cause a stir and will result in the deaths of some 91,000 human beings. This is followed by Japan with 16 deaths, and in the same year, Pakistan will be affected with about 210 deaths. In 2009, Costa Rica will have to mourn 44 dead, after which, in the same year in central Italy, a series of earthquakes occurring over years will announce the coming catastrophes, which will claim around 300 human lives at the beginning. Then, further in the year 2009, there is Indonesia with around 90, Bhutan with 15, and again Indonesia with 1,200 deaths to mention. This is followed by the year 2010, when Haiti will be affected by some 320,000 deaths, which will then be followed by Chile with about 600 dead, while in Turkey there will be about 55 deaths to count. Then, in the same year, China can expect around 3,020 deaths, after which, due to powerful seaquakes, Indonesia will have around 520 deaths, and only 1 month later, another 20, and 4 months later, another 510 deaths. Iran then follows with about 15 deaths, after which New Zealand will also be hit by earthquakes and seaquakes in the next year, 2011, which will cause the loss of around 200 human lives. Then China will again carry on the death toll with about 30 killed, after which Japan will be hit by an enormous seaquake and a mega tsunami, which will then claim about 18,700 human lives. After that, Myanmar follows with about 80 deaths, Spain with 10, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan with 16, and another time India with 123 dead, after which, again, Turkey will have around 800 dead. Then, in 2012, there will be seaquakes again in the Philippines, which will claim around 150 dead, as well as in Indonesia another 25 dead, Italy 22, then Afghanistan about 80, and Iran will have around another 330 dead. Guatemala will follow with 48, and then Myanmar again with 30 dead. In the year 2013 in Indonesia, a seaquake will bring 18 deaths, and with the Solomon Islands, 17 deaths, and then in Iran again 40, and after that again in Iran and in Pakistan a further 45, as also in China 223, in Afghanistan 32, and in the Philippines 112 human beings will die. For 2014, only China will have 619 earthquake deaths to count, after which, in 2015, Nepal will have firstly around 9,000 and again, 2 weeks later, 150 dead to mourn. Subsequently, in Chile, 14 human beings will be killed by quake activity, after which, again in Afghanistan, 461 human beings will be killed. These are all the greater earthquakes as well as diverse sea quakes through which, during all the time of the mentioned 15 years, more than 480,000 human lives will be to mourn, whereby, however, during the same time span worldwide, there will be several thousand other sea and earthquakes which partly only cause very great destruction, however, will not claim more than 5 human lives. From the year 2016 and beyond, however, those earthquakes in central Italy and around the world will follow, along with severe sea quakes, which will form the beginning of the great coming catastrophes and all predicted terribleness that will be accompanied by immense natural catastrophes. So, in the coming times, also tremendous floods and catastrophes, which have never happened since time immemorial, will occur, as well as ever more frequent and more devastating forest fires, which then, aside from Australia, will occur more in the central and northern hemispheres of America, Europe and Asia, and by which also Switzerland will be affected. Great upheavals will occur as a consequence of the disappearing of the ice deserts of the Arctic and Antarctica because of volcanic eruptions around the world, but also as a consequence of the pole shifting which has been ongoing already for some centuries, as it will also, to a large part, be due to the destruction and irreparable eliminations and exterminations which are caused through the human overpopulation to the planet, to nature, all oceans and inland waters, as well as to the atmosphere and the plant world and world of living organisms, and also to the climate. Due to the nature of the geography of the planet, the land, the mountains, the forests, oceans and inland waters, the movements only happen gradually, however, unstoppably, for which the unstoppable and irrational and increasingly excessive overpopulation and its irresponsible destruction machinations and elimination machinations will be around 85% of the cause. All over the world from then on there will be unpeace, which will often lead back to the USA-triggered irresponsible secret service intrigues, manipulations and military-armed conflicts and wars. This, in addition to the fact that, in many countries, governments will be overthrown internally with the use of weapons, and power struggles of rival groups will take place, as a result of which increasingly hostile armed conflicts will take place all over the world, often continuing over several decades. It will emerge that new misregulation occurs in the systems of government within various countries, which means that the populations are constantly bombarded with new taxes because the persons responsible, the financial leaders in the governments and those who have the might themselves, do not know how to handle their finances and thereby drive their countries into horrendous debt, for which the taxpayers are then made liable with tax increases. But the time will come when human beings from the populace will occupy government offices, and a purification will be carried out at higher and lower government and office positions, whereby greater attention will be given to the welfare of the populace and also consideration given to the individual human being. This will also result in certain circumstances and changes in political, economic, and all other conditions, and through that, equality between the two sexes will also come about, as well as a broader understanding of the really essential requirements of the individual human being. In the process, interpersonal relations obtain validity again, which over the next decades and into the new millennium will very quickly stagnate, through which human beings become stunted and lose the value of being human from their sense as well as the true meaning of love, whereby they become cold and unconcerned in their thoughts and feelings, and thereby obtuse in regard to their fellow human beings and their problems. This will take place especially from the 1980s, when the new sounds of so-called music will fall completely out of kind and will no longer have anything to do with harmony and music, because at this time, a change to complete disharmony occurs in the consciousness of human beings, which will also impair and damage the nerves as well as the entire cognition. In many human beings, these sounds will ruin the behavioral control system and call forth a negative transformation of information, which seriously damages the whole of the behavior in all who succumb to these disharmonious sounds. Everything will lead to the fact that many will be unable to cope with life and become aggressive, unconcerned, and out of touch with reality, which will extend to abandoning any sense of self-esteem and self-worth, because the sense of life will be seen only in the disharmony of the sounds which work destructively on the consciousness. In many respects, this then leads to hardship and misery, as well as to the fellow human beings no longer being respected and only being met with highly unworthy unconcernedness and not being given any assistance when they are in distress and need help. To the contrary, everything will lead to the human beings, according to the disharmonic sounds, becoming disharmonious within themselves and, owing to the complete unsatisfaction in regard to themselves, becoming self-destructive and stunted in themselves. And this will also affect their behavior towards fellow human beings, with the relations with them breaking and their well-being being completely disregarded as a result of indifference. This will result in the emergence of a radical malignancy which will be based in thoughtlessness, recklessness, neglect, lack of concern, unheedfulness, carelessness, unconsiderateness, lovelessness, uncarefulness, imprudence, irresponsibility, and inattentiveness, through which, in increasing wantonness, many fellow human beings will also be harmed, brutally maltreated, hit, robbed, and even beaten to death. The time of these happenings will also be that in which the negative outcoming effects of the advancing overpopulation are laid bare in the way that the law of nature effectively unfolds its regulation in such a form that many human beings will be harmed in their consciousness and body. From the 1960s onwards, a major problem will begin to affect the overpopulation human beings, making them suffer from and susceptible to many serious and often unhealable illnesses. Thereby more and more cancers and many forms of allergy, which assume even life-threatening stages, become the Great Plague, because due to an overbreeding and weakening of the humankind, a wide-reaching immunodeficiency affects very many human beings, and this will then continue well into the new millennium. As a result of the increasing overpopulation, it will also come about that human health impairments of the consciousness will take the upper hand, and a general weakness of the intelligence will spread, which will make human beings blunt towards reality, become irrational, stupid, and slowly stunted.
These changes will come, that is certain, and for the majority of the Earth's humankind, there will be no evolution or revolution for the better for a long time, for which manifold religious thinking will be to blame, because this is not directed to reality and its truth, but to falsehood and unreality. The basis of reality and truth will be understood only when the great and unavoidable catastrophes come and call into question the further existence of the entire Earth's humanity. There will be no divinity then, but only the reality and truth according to which every individual human being must direct himself or herself and live accordingly. And this will be the basis of that which was taught by all 6 proclaimers of the teaching of the prophets from Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel to Muhammad, and which is now taught by you for the last time. All the prophets taught, and the last also teaches in the present time, that when the sun reaches its highest activity in the coming time, that then the change to the new age after 1844 brings unimagined progress in all fields of achievements of human beings of the earth, which will be of both good but also of evil, and will lead to gradual, incisive changes in every respect. The whole brings a gradual catastrophic activity in the coming time. It will not be as ignoramuses ironically assume that human life will continue as before if all the changes come as they are announced through foresight. It will also be that certain happenings will not be gradual but sudden, and consequently the coming changes will be of a different nature. The seeds for this have been sown by Earth's humankind by the continual increase of the overpopulation, and now they sprout and will let their evil fruits of irresponsibility, destruction, devastation, and extermination grow and be harvested over the coming years and decades, whereby new seeds come about, which again are further spread out and sown. And as regards the occurrence of the wandering of the poles, this will also contribute its part to the transformation of the planet and the conditions of life, and to the plights of Earth's humanity, causing shifts in the north of the European continent. And it is certain that all things will come thus, but also the consequences of the wandering of the poles. That is to say, the pole shift can be survived, but certain areas will become dangerous areas where survival will hardly be possible. Through the period of the wandering of the poles, there will be many tremendous worldwide tremors and changes, due to which a great part of Earth humanity will die, which will be natural but also caused by the planet-wide, irresponsibly bred up overpopulation, as well as its nonsensical, destructive, eliminating and exterminating excesses. As already explained, unusually enormous earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, rock avalanches, and floods of great proportions will occur in the seas, as will tremendous tidal waves, all of which humanity can no longer set anything against. The future new coming wars, triggered worldwide through the blame of America, as well as fatal illnesses and rampantly spreading diseases, uprisings and civil wars occurring in many countries, and the emergence of several major terrorist organizations and small terrorist groups form the early stage and signal for all happenings coming in the third millennium. And it will be that these will gradually follow one another and can cause up to 2/3 of the humankind of the earth to die. These happenings will inevitably come, and the resulting apocalyptic destructions and disastrous devastations will unleash an unparalleled,
incredible confusion among all human civilized life. The whole coming chaos and disaster in the coming times up to the second and third decade of the third millennium will still appear harmless in contrast to that which the times after that will bring. All chaos periods will, however, always be followed by rebuilding phases, after which, however, destruction will come again and void everything again. Some of these happenings will begin already in the coming decades, with Italy being affected because of the beginning of the coming upheavals, because, on the European continent, the main center of the outgoing destruction will lie submarine in the Mediterranean area, as well as in eastern central Italy, where, from the years 2002 and 2009, serious earthquakes, and then from 2016 and 2017, a series of earthquakes will announce the coming happenings. From there, about 5 countries all around will be affected by the disastrous destructions and devastations and partly sink into the sea. The whole will also extend to the Irish, Icelandic, and Western European coasts, and especially the low-lying British coasts, whereby the great upheavals will induce a large part of the humankind to turn away from the wrong belief in religions, sects, and an imaginary God, in order to bethink the return to reality and truth, and to return with their thoughts and their consciousness to the knowledge of the natural creational values. The coming times will bring very sad things far into the new millennium, including the worst of all terrible things, which consists of the falling away from the knowledge of the truth, of the natural creational, and thus from the reality and the truth, and again increasingly to the clinging to wrong belief forms. The darkness of belief and unknowledge will be preferred to the light of clear knowledge, as many of the earth's human beings will find that death is better than life, which is why inconsiderately and unscrupulously there will be murdering and also suicide practiced on a large scale by death organizations. Only a few will search for the truthly truth, for in droves they will follow the seducers who, with religious and sectarian empty phrases, know how to seduce human beings into a confused belief in a God. Every rational human being who does not believe but knows about the true truth of reality will be considered crazy, but the believer of God will erroneously be considered wise. In the coming times, trustworthy human beings will be cursed until far into the future as being untrustworthy ones, while on the other hand, untrustworthy ones will be highly praised as being trustworthy. And this will thus come to an ever greater degree from the middle of the coming 1970s. Speakers, journalists, missionaries, recruiters, and public media and lecturers will appear and publicly spread mendacious stories and slander about true truths to kill them off and lead the peoples into the unreal and away from truth through thought-up mendacious facts. And when human beings are discussing significant questions and wanting to receive correct answers in order to become truly knowledgeable about reality and to know the truth, then, as it has been from ancient times, they will be misled by answers which are lies and led along the path of the truth, less religious and sect beliefs. The future of Earth's humankind also looks gloomy in the way that women and men inconsiderately beget descendants and bring them into the world, but they no longer care for them, and because they no longer see any use in children, they let them deteriorate into criminals and those who are incapable of life and society. Many infertile women will irrationally and by artificial means have offspring procreated in themselves,
although they bear no responsibility for them and cannot raise them, and with which they will also irresponsibly increase the overpopulation. Jealousy, greed, oppression, and strife will become the day-to-day business in marriage and families. Lies and calumnies about the truth will generally become prevalent and will drive many blameless human beings in their thoughts and feelings, as well as in their psyche, into affliction and misery and even suicide or murder. Some countries will become desolated because desertification, that is, a progressive formation of desert, will be in progress, which constantly occurs due to a worsening of the soil in relatively dry areas and has already been taking place for a long time. This desertification occurs due to various factors, including the climate change that has been going on for several centuries, but on a large scale primarily through human activities. The degradation of soil in the new time and also in the future, primarily caused by human beings, brings into effect the formation and rapid spread of deserts or desert-like conditions. Most of the desertification is accompanied by an adjacent formation of steppes, which means that the Earth is already losing 2 million hectares of fertile land every year, which will increase to about 15 million hectares by the year 2020. The destructive work of human beings, which contributes greatly to desertification, is the irrational, excessive logging of the public forests, the soils of which, after a few years, become impoverished, infertile, are completely leached and led to desertification. In the same way, this will happen with the floodplain forests and floodplains in order to build human dwellings on their ground. In the coming decades, too, completely incorrect methods of irrigation will be applied, which will destroy very much fertile, cultivated land, as much as will be destroyed by the horrendous construction of roads and other transport routes, as well as by the construction of immensely many dwellings for the endlessly growing and ultimately all-destroying overpopulation, through which, in addition to the agricultural overgrazing of the useful areas, an immense overuse of all cultivated land will take place, which then will likewise lead to desertification. Anarchy, bloodshed, and gavolt in families and on the streets will become an everyday thing and bring much horror and great harm. Many offspring will become the cause of great annoyances, grief, brawls, insults, and anxiety in families, on the streets, in schools, in workplaces, and in public. Many offspring will be born outside of marriage and do not know their fathers because already, at a young age, whoring by children and young ones will be carried out by both sexes. Many people fall victim to a weakness in intelligence and a poverty of rationality, which they try to compensate for through mockery, chatter, and much senseless criticism of everything and everyone, as well as through consumption of alcohol and hallucinogenic drugs. Many human beings will boastfully advance unrealities, distortions, falsifications, fairy stories, fictions, and lies as a substitute for knowledge in the absence of real knowledge and in lack of cognizance. Human beings will enter into connections with strangers, unconcerned in regard to the connections with their own family, their others next to them, and their partners. They will break off contact with them and let it wither, as they will also deny and slander them. Hypocrites will gain the upper hand over all honest human beings and gain control over the affairs of the fellow human beings and the community, through which evil and depraved human beings who very badly get out of control of the good human nature will direct all sorts of business, sex, associations, organizations, and so forth. Criminals and felons who employ gavolt, as well as
malicious and psychopathic human beings of all kinds will rapidly increase as a consequence of the rapidly increasing overpopulation and the general deterioration of the humankind of the earth, and will bring much evil and disaster. In all the coming times until far into the third millennium, human beings will increasingly neglect their thoughts, feelings, and the psyche, which will lead to the greatest depravity of the humankind of the earth as it has never before been able to arise. A great many human beings will become unconcerned, conscienceless, thoughtless, and feelingless individuals, and, like bloodthirsty beasts, will torture, murder, kill, and thirst for the blood of their fellow human beings, because their senses for that which is good and worth living will be obfuscated, and they will go hand in hand with rapacity, pathological craving for revenge, egoism, envy and lies, slander, and ongoing warfare and terrorism. Henceforth, many dictators will be overthrown, as the crowns of the emperors and kings will also fall. In various countries of earth, as a consequence of unsuitable, might-possessed rulers and their forms of ruling, from then on, increasingly bloody fighting operations and murderous actions against the populations will be carried out within the country by guerrilla groups or by fanatical, bloodlusting religious gangs. And the future shows that one day whole nations will die, and indeed through wars and acts of terror, as well as through hunger, lack of water, and gavolt felonies, and it will be so bad as would have been unthinkable in the world previously. As a result, innumerable persecuted human beings, which will be as many as 350 million, will crisscross the world and search for life security. And this fact will require the attention of the whole world. All roads and drivable vehicles will be filled with masses of those fleeing from one place to the next, while the smallest, largest, and most beautiful villages and cities will be burned and destroyed by bombs, rockets, and fire. And it will be terrible how families will be torn apart, scattered, and their members killed, whereby all good knowledge and true love disappear and also cause the world to be empty. Earth human beings will become more and more disposed towards terrible war actions, to hatred and egoism, pathological craving for revenge and retaliation, and unconcernedness. They will persecute one another as a result of enmity and construct an ideology out of the worst materialism that has ever been on earth. And there will be conscienceless barbarians who follow this ideology and shrink from nothing to indulge in their vices. Every means will be right for them, even to the point of slander and murder in order to gain wealth, for they will think that there is nothing that cannot be conquered or cannot be obtained if only the greed for it is big enough. The future of Earth's humankind brings a progress of absolute evil, which can only be stopped by a tremendous catastrophe, as only the planet itself and nature can evoke. And this catastrophe will be triggered by the consequences of the tremendous destructions, eliminations, and exterminations which arise from the felonious machinations of the overpopulation. These powers will be triggered by the hands of the egoists and depraved ones among the Earth's humankind, for they are the ones who make themselves instruments of the most abominable felonies against the human population of Earth, as well as against nature, the planet, the water, and the world of life forms and plants. When the Earth's humanity has reached the point of culmination of its physical intelligence and its civilization has been raised to the highest possible level, it will be absolutely incapable of progressing in the good, because it will simply stand still and will no longer be able to make any progress at all. The fact is that if the Earth's humankind does not change for the better and good and does not stop the overpopulation, then it will destroy itself. In order to prevent this, it is necessary that a new consciousness arises and is introduced, which is built on the creational natural laws and recommendations as are taught through the teaching of the prophets. It is this teaching alone, when it is followed, which can placate the peoples and lead them into a new world. Only through the following of this teaching can there be a peaceful world which will be freed from the old hatred and unpeace. The disunity, pathological opinions, false principles and actions will take the upper hand with the Earth's humankind, which will lead to many people becoming sad victims of their own desires and falling into their pure egoism, which will be especially expressed already in the first 2 decades of the 3rd millennium. And when, in the 2nd decade of the new millennium in Germany, through the country's woman who has the might, through her morbid irrationality and her consciousness disturbance, great streams of refugees from Arabia, Africa, and Asia are called forth. Then unbridled hatred of foreigners and race hatred will break out in many groups and organizations. The foreigner hostility and racial hostility, as well as murderous terror, will claim a great number of human lives, as also frequent foreigner, hostile, and racist demonstrations will come about, especially against refugees. Thereby there will again and again be geopolitical excesses, because right-wing thoughts will be widespread, especially because of the senseless streams of refugees that invade Europe and which are triggered irresponsibly by the German woman who has the might. It will be alarming that hostility towards Auslanders, foreigners, and other races will occur in all social strata, whereby the attitude towards all refugees and asylum seekers will reach a dangerous dimension. Refugee accommodations will be subjected to right-wing extremistical criminal offenses, set on fire and destroyed, with the result that human beings are also harmed, and even the death of the refugees will be approvingly accepted. Foreigner hostile and racially hostile acts of Gewalt, as well as hatred of asylum seekers and refugees, will, unfortunately, periodically become part of everyday life, whereby those who are hostile to asylum seekers, strangers and other races will by no means be only people who, as members of right-wing extremist groups and terrorist organizations, will engage in their hatred of strangers and other races. There will also be demonstrations by normal citizens against refugee homes, with right-wing extremists also teaming up with the supposed concerned citizens or mingling with them. In the coming period of the first 2 decades of the 3rd millennium, the world will experience the greatest refugee crisis and the biggest rush of asylum seekers since the Third World War, which ended in 1945. And as already explained, the one responsible for that will be the German woman who has the might, who, disturbed in the consciousness, will act irrationally and confused and will be spurred on by her followers who are fascinated by her. More than 1.5 million human beings will be fleeing to Europe and seeking asylum in Germany, Switzerland, and in the dictatorship union countries, whereby many who are work-shy, parasites, criminals, and Gewalt felons, as well as terrorists, will smuggle themselves in. At the same time, the numbers of right-wing, extreme, criminal, and felonious acts of Gewalt will also, as a consequence, increase in Europe. However, there, through all righteous refugees and asylum seekers, will be the target for all those who, on one hand, are already unsatisfied anyway, as well as for those who are unbridled haters of strangers and other races, who will equally make all refugees and righteous asylum seekers and refugee scapegoats for those who will be criminals. Gewalt felons, those who use physical and psychical gewalt, terrorists and therefore fake refugees. However, the righteous refugees and asylum seekers will not be able to defend themselves because they will not be familiar with the authorities, customs and traditions in the European countries, and will also not master the language. Therefore, especially in the new millennium, hostility towards Auslanders, foreigners, asylum seekers and refugees in Europe, and indeed especially in Germany, will be widespread. And this will also be because many locals want to defend their privileges and for that reason demonstrate hostility towards foreigners and other races, because they will believe they will come up short themselves and that someone wants to take something away from them. For this reason, hatred will be exactly directed against the righteous, protection-needing refugees and asylum seekers who truthfully will be in need of protection. Many Europeans will doubt that refugees are really being persecuted in their homeland, which is why they will refuse to be generous to those who are truly persecuted through acts of war and so forth. Particularly in Germany, the characteristics of the hostility towards Auslanders, foreigners, asylum seekers, and other races, as well as anti-Semitism and right-wing extremist attitudes, will again grow strongly in the new millennium. Thereby, also very quickly, the opinion that Auslanders, foreigners, refugees, and asylum seekers would only invade Europe to take advantage of the welfare states will begin to be rampant. But this will in fact only apply to those who are unrighteous ones. In the future, many human beings will be victims of their own dishonesty and addictions, as well as their greed for vengeance and pathological craving for retaliation, and many will be driven away from their possessions and ultimately even killed. Everywhere, separation, flight anxiety, hatred, schadenfreude, distress and misery, greed for possession, death and many changes will appear, and there will not be any more real certainty to find anywhere. On open streets, women and girls will be treated with physical and psychical gewalt, kidnapped, forced into whoring and murdered, while children are kidnapped and sexually abused, killed or made into labor slaves. The governing ones will do little or nothing about it because many of them themselves will be involved in whoredom or child abuse and in dark, unlawful dealings. In politics, their inadequate opinions will diverge, and they will make laws, principles, and ordinances that they themselves will not keep to, or which they will directly act against. They will all be concerned solely about their own advantages, as a consequence of which the general confusion will increase day by day. This will result in the enmity arising among the governing ones and politicians themselves, and, as a result, no rational solutions and rules will be found, so that everything rational will only be left to be desired, and nothing valuable will be achieved. Large and useless decisions are made, or ones which make the people stupid or exploit them. Taxes are driven high, and political meetings of low intelligence are held, through which, however, irrational parties, conspiracies, and harm-bringing new connections are created. The bad, imperious, and incompetent governing ones will push themselves up and gain positions of might, while good government powers, who are good human beings, will be pushed back or will themselves resign. Thus, the wrong, bad, and incapable governing ones will not have to make an effort in order to give their plans form and content, and to be able to push them through. Great and insurmountable obstacles will be set against the good and righteous ones in the governments and in politics, as well as in the parties, which they cannot overcome. It is therefore possible that in the governments, politics, parties and offices of all kinds, as well as in legislation, inhumanity and disinterest for the welfare of the people will increase more and more, because each one will only take care of himself or herself and those fellow human beings who are pushed because of them, or misfortune will be ignored with a malicious laugh, be harassed, or even cursed. It will be, as has always been the case, that all good alliances which are formed will never become reality, while bad alliances and treaties will always be fulfilled. Good connections will be destroyed by hatred and pathological craving for might, and will be made void through great bloodshed. In the end, everything will be so hostile and destroyed as it was at the beginning and before any peaceful decisions. Thus, many deaths will continue to reap an abundant harvest, and the destruction of human achievements due to wars, unpeace, and terror will continue, as well as the eliminations and extinctions in nature and of its plants and creatures of all kinds. However, it will also be the case that many human beings will be killed by various serious illnesses which appear more and more, as well as by newly emerging rampantly spreading diseases, such as those which will still break out in this century, but also after the turn of the millennium, and will spread over the entire earth, such as the great rampantly spreading disease which from 1980 will cost millions of lives worldwide and will exist far into the new millennium, along with other bad rampantly spreading diseases. And that which will arise among the human beings with regard to rampantly spreading diseases will also come about among animals and other creatures, as well as among aquatic creatures and among birds and so forth, from which then also domestic animals, other domestic creatures, and all kinds of domestic poultry will be affected. As already mentioned, the new times will bring moral depravity and unfairness, which will climb to great heights and will bring much evil and disadvantage. The consequences of the diminished knowledge about reality, that is, the reality and its truth, as well as the general knowledge and the learned knowledge, as well as the disappearance of intelligence, as happened already in earlier times, will rekindle the false and irrational teachings of the religions and their false morality, and will once more maliciously pull human beings under their spell. Through that, faith, hatred, pathological craving for revenge and unfairness, and so forth, will spread again among the greatest proportion of human beings, instead of righteousness, whereby the sheer egotism, selfishness, self-benefit, interest purely for one's own sake, and being concerned about one's own advantage will be the sole basis of belief, as has been the case since time immemorial. Through that, the bonds of love in regard to fellow human beings will dissolve again, which is contrary to all the virtues which are made ridiculous, as also fairness and rights of the people will be made a thing of mockery by the governing ones, the mighty and the administrators. And peculiar and unexpected official, governmental and government departmental directives, instructions, laws, taxes, ordinances, and resolutions and so forth will lead to great riots, revolts, demonstrations, and bloody gavolt actions among the peoples, and will cause much that is terrible. The nearer, farther, and distant future of the earth and earth's humankind will be thus, as it will unchangeably come about from the foresight, or from the included prophecies, if these are not changed for the better and the good.